I think people always underestimate the distance from impressive prototype or demo to something that's rock solid, like works in every situation. This is where I think the overhype comes from. It's not that it's not useful. For a long time, you're going to need people to decide when it's appropriate to use it, to verify the results. And that's going to be like years and years of work. In 5 or 10 years, when this technology is ubiquitous, I think you're going to see kind of a Cambrian explosion of like vehicle types.
Welcome to AI Truth Serum, your weekly antidote to the hype and doom of AI. I'm your host, Greg Shove, 7-time founder and the CEO of Section AI. Today, we're talking with Tim Lee, technology reporter and analyst and author of Understanding AI, one of my favorite newsletters about LLMs, autonomous vehicles, and the impact of AI on our lives at work and at home. Before that, he wrote about technology, economics, and public policy for Vox, The Washington Post, and Ars Technica. Tim and I are going to talk about AIs, autonomous driving, and in particular, Waymo. Waymo went from a cool demo 8 years ago to now operating in 6 markets and growing very quickly. And I think there's a lot we can all learn from how to build human-ready AI products like Waymo's had to do and put them, in their case, on the road or into real life. So lots to learn from Waymo, and we're going to unpack that now with Tim. Hey, Tim, great to see you again. Thanks for joining. And thanks for writing Understanding AI. You're one of my trusted, sane advisors on AI, I guess. Is it about 2 years old?
It's almost 3 years old. When ChatGPT came out, I was doing a different newsletter focused on economics. And almost immediately I started thinking about, should I be writing about AI? And I decided that I would regret it if I didn't spend a lot of time on AI. And so I pivoted in March 2023.
But you've always been a reporter or an analyst, or how'd you get here?
I studied computer science in college. I was in the think tank world here in DC for a couple of years. Got into blogging from there. And so I was one of the early bloggers, and I wrote some for Ars Technica. But then I decided I was interested in policy and computer science. And so I went to Princeton, which has an interdisciplinary center that's focused on public policy and computer science. And I got a master's degree in computer science there, did some stuff about government and cybersecurity. Then my friends from the blogging world were getting cool jobs in journalism, so I jumped back into journalism. I was in a PhD program, but decided I wasn't on a path to be a computer science professor. And so jump back into journalism. I've been doing that for about 15 years.
And now kind of on your own or like entrepreneur?
Yeah, so I started a Substack. First, I had one focused on economics. Then I shifted to AI. So I have one other writer that's contributing to my Substack newsletter.
Love your newsletter. Read it all the time. Appreciate you being a voice of reason, sanity, sort of clear-eyed perspective on what's going on. So what is going on? I wake up most days, Tim, a little bit like Jekyll and Hyde, right? This is an AI bubble. These LLMs are overhyped and they hallucinate and they're not very useful. There's a lot of circular revenue moving around the AI economy, and this thing is all going to burst, and the fever dream is about to break. The same day, think about these models are incredible. They're very, very powerful, useful to me personally, my company, the products we're building. OpenAI's revenue forecasts and growth are really just stunning. And I think one of your predictions for 2026 was that OpenAI would meet its revenue forecast, I think around $20 billion of annualized revenue. So do you have that same sort of what the hell's going on? And how do you reconcile those two kind of different narratives?
I think something that makes it hard to think about this is that it takes a long time from when a new technology is first demonstrated to when it becomes really useful, because it takes a long time for it to mature and then for people to learn how to use it and to try it in different use cases. And so the way I think about what's happening right now is in late 2024, you started to see the emergence of models that could go for long periods of time and could use tools. And that allowed a new generation of coding agents like Claude Code, and there's also a bunch of third-party ones like Cursor. Before, you could ask a question and get an answer, but now you could say, write code that does this. That's the first application. And that capability, like I said, has been around for 12 to 18 months, but I think it's taken a while for the rest of the world to start noticing, first programmers and now other people who are not programmers. And I think every time a new group of people kind of tunes in and says, wow, it can do something I didn't realize, especially the last couple of months when people have talked about Claude Code, it's not my sense that Claude Code is dramatically better than it was 3 or 6 months ago, but it's just a bunch of people are trying it and finding it's as good as it was a few months ago. Right. And I think that relates to the revenue numbers, because I think part of the reason we keep seeing revenue exceed expectations is that larger and larger groups of people are discovering AI already has the capability it's had for a while. And I expect that's going to continue happening. The models are getting better, and there's lots and lots of people out there who just have not put the time in to figure out how to use these tools well. And as that happens, I think you're going to have more and more people that just want to use it.
Is that why you think some of these AI leaders, or if not most of them, if not all of them actually, have what some might call smugness, others might just consider, a lot of confidence about where this is going in terms of the capabilities and their need for all this capital and their willingness to bet on this future because they're seeing these models inside themselves sooner. They get a year or 6-month lead, right, in terms of what these models are capable of. And they probably know what we don't know, right? Is that what's going on, do you think?
I think that's part of it. I also think that some of these people, especially Sam Altman and Dario Amodei, are just true believers. Like, they believe this was going to happen for 5 or 10 years, and it's happening. They think it's going to go much further. They think we're going to get AI scientists where they like have major scientific breakthroughs, and you can give them like a week or a month's worth of human work, and it'll like do it autonomously. I'm not sure it's going to go that quickly or that soon, but I do think definitely they're seeing the demand materialize. And I think especially the larger tech companies, they're not necessarily full of true believers. It's just for months and months. They'll make forecasts about here's how much data center capacity we'll have. They'll build it and then it'll sell out instantly. And so they're just used to that. And so I think at this point, they've gotten pretty comfortable with basically like as much as we can build, we can deploy and make money on. Now, obviously, that might not hold true forever, but so far my sense is there's not a lot of speculative building. They're just trying to keep up with the demand.
That's my sense as well. If they don't see demand, why would they build, right? It's a lot of money now, and now they're using debt, so it's interest expense hitting the income statement. Presumably they would not make these investments, to your point, unless they saw demand. I want to go back to sort of capabilities, though, because I think Anthropic and OpenAI both just announced, or maybe let slip, all code is now being written by AI. It doesn't mean they don't have engineers, obviously, but they're basically saying that humans are instigating the work and obviously reviewing the work, but basically they're using coding agents to write all the software. So is that believable to you?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think there's a definitional question because even a couple of years ago, you had a Copilot where it would do autocomplete for like individual lines of code. And in some sense, the AI is writing that code. Now you can do kind of more sophisticated version of this where you can write a whole function or do a whole bug fix, but it's still the human says, okay, go fix this bug. And then the AI does some stuff and comes back with a potential fix, and then the human reviews it. I absolutely believe that most, maybe all of the code is AI written in that sense, but you still need a human engineer to figure out what should the AI be working on and then verify it. The performance of the AIs really depends on how you set them up. There's kind of a two-step process where you want to first ask the AI to make a detailed plan for itself. Like, here's the steps I'm going to follow. And then you review the plan, and if the plan's reasonable, then go off and actually do it. There's a bunch of tricks like that get better performance. And I think part of what's happening in the program profession is programmers are learning how to level up, how to use these models effectively. But yeah, I think once you know how to do that, the actual code generation is largely AI. And I think more and more organizations are discovering that.
Just look how quickly you and I just passed over that. That's an accepted way of working. It was unthinkable 3 years ago. And then to your point, it was autocomplete on a line of code maybe a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. Now you're like, oh yeah, all the code's written by AI. I'm not saying it's going to be a whole bunch of job loss. I think quite the opposite. I'm hiring more engineers at my company, and they're all more productive, and I want more of them.
I feel like there's more continuity here than some of the AI people want to talk about. Because if you go back 50 years, it used to be you had to write code in machine code, right, with ones and zeros. And then we had something called a compiler where you could write in a high-level language and it would turn it into machine code. So in some sense, like, programmers have always been in the business of automating their own work, taking whatever they're doing now and making it programs that can do it. Somebody still has to tell the computer what you want it to do in a precise way. So I see this as like the next step of like a 50, 60-year process where programmers are working at a higher level of abstraction, and there's like some program that figures out the details for you.
So just to complete that line of thinking, then, kids in school getting computer science degrees should not worry then about their jobs, meaning we have more software engineers now than we had 40, 50 years ago. What's your take just to close the loop on the jobs?
I would say should not worry is too strong. I think there's going to be jobs involved in working with computers and making them do things. I think it's a little bit unpredictable what that'll look like. The main thing I would say is you should make sure people's skills are part of what you're doing. Programming jobs that are going to be most likely to exist are the ones where you're dealing directly with the customer or the CEO or whoever is deciding, and then kind of translating that into what the computer does. If you're a programmer who's like in the bowels of the engineering team, that job might go away.
I met a startup CEO recently. She's running an AI lab, meaning building applications for other companies, custom enterprise applications. But she described their core capability in 2 90-minute discovery sessions with business users. Think about people in accounts payable or people in contract review or procurement. 2 90-minute discovery sessions run by AI, recorded by AI. They can turn that into basically a product spec and a working prototype pretty much overnight, which is kind of mind-blowing, but that's kind of what you're saying, right? I want to go back, though, to how I started, which is I wake up confused. This is a bubble and it's going to burst. All these AI companies will get their comeuppance, or no, these are the most consequential companies of the next decade. I call them super companies. What's your take?
I think some people consider me a AI skeptic in the sense that I don't think we're going to get like quote unquote AGI in the next 2 or 3 years. I think there's just going to be a 5 to 10 year period of just taking whatever capabilities the models have and kind of diffusing it throughout the economy in the same way that like it took 10 or 15 years, when the internet was invented in the early 90s, before most companies were using email and had websites and could do all the back end stuff in a kind of modern digital way. I think it's going to be the same kind of thing. And so are the current valuations or the valuations that are coming, are those going to be justified? Maybe it'll be a little disappointing. Think about something like Uber. If you invested in Uber at $100 billion, that wasn't a massive, payday for you. Uber also didn't go out of business. It turned out to be a perfectly viable business. I think the worst case scenario is similar to that. Best case is if capabilities increase rapidly, you might actually make a good return on investing now.
And I tend to agree about AGI. Like, who gives a shit? I don't even know what it is. The definition keeps changing. And it seems like from an economic perspective or a business perspective, at least today, AGI is irrelevant. You got to get your head around these technologies as they currently perform.
Well, it depends on what question you're asking. The question is is it worth investing in these technologies? I think even if AGI is far away, the answer is probably still yes. But if you're like a worker or a college student thinking about what should I major in, if you're going to have kind of human level intelligence across the board in 5 years, maybe there's certain professions you want to stay away from. You're going to make different choices versus if you think it's going to be a 20-year process.
Maybe that's our segue to Waymo. My second most favorite technology of 2025, in part because I moved to San Francisco so I could take advantage of Waymo, and that our older son works at Waymo. Smart move, buddy. Way smarter than I ever made early in my career to go work for a company like Waymo. And I think anybody who's been in a Waymo would be like, wow, this is a pretty incredible consumer experience. What do you think of Waymo as a consumer?
I've been to both LA and San Francisco and done maybe a dozen Waymo rides, probably not as much as you have as a local. It's a good experience. It drives cautiously. I did not see it make any mistakes, and they're growing rapidly. I think they're in 6 cities now and trying to do another dozen cities in 2026.
And you cover autonomous a lot and Waymo a lot in your newsletter, Understanding AI. Why? What's your fascination with autonomous, and maybe what lessons can we learn from it, Tim?
This is something I think about a lot. I would say the current chatbot moment, or maybe the chatbot moment a year or two ago, feels a lot like Waymo circa 2017, where there's just a ton of excitement, a ton of money flowing in. You can really pinpoint it. In March of 2018, an Uber car hit and killed a woman. There's also a deadly Tesla autopilot crash that same month of March 2018. And so then there was this big kind of retrenchment. A bunch of the early self-driving companies went out of business. The early 2020s, you had a bunch of articles about now self-driving is decades away. And then 2023, Waymo started expanding again, and now they're expanding quite quickly. One of the kind of big picture things I take away is just early hype usually is overhyped, and people inside an industry are almost always over-optimistic in some ways. But on the flip side of that, at least in this case, the pessimists were also wrong. People said this is never going to work, or it's decades away. The truth is somewhere in the middle. Companies tend to figure out the problems and get a working product. Every time they scale up a little bit, they encounter new problems. So one thing they had a big problem with in 2023 was dealing with emergency vehicles. If you come up to, say, a car crash scene and there's a policeman directing traffic, that's really hard for an AI system to understand. But that's rare enough that when they were testing on a small scale, they didn't encounter it very much. And then when they did encounter it, the safety driver would just take over. It was only after they went driverless and started to scale up that they started having this. And there was a period of a few months where they had a lot of friction with the San Francisco Fire Department. There's now a system where the city of San Francisco can send a message to Waymo geofencing the area and saying stay away from this area because there's a fire there, stuff like that. And so Waymo built this infrastructure, they did some training, and now they're in a pretty good situation vis-a-vis the first responders in San Francisco. There was an incident a couple of weeks ago where a child darted in front of a Waymo vehicle and they slammed on the brakes. They hit it at I think 6 miles an hour. The kid was not seriously injured. It's not clear to me, was there a regression where it's not working as well as it was before, or just are they at a scale now where they're starting to notice this? But this is another thing they need to deal with. I think they probably will, and I think they'll continue scaling up, but the overall safety record is very good. I think people always underestimate the distance from impressive prototype or demo to something that's rock solid, works in every situation. You can run it and forget about it.
Especially in the real world, right?
Especially in the real world,
with a lot of humans, right? So where do you park these cars? How do you recharge them? How do you clean them?
I also think there's some of this with chatbots where it's okay, pull up ChatGPT and ask for a legal opinion.
Right.
And 90% of the time, it's a pretty good legal opinion. All right, we're ready to having AI lawyers. Then do I really want to rely on something that's 90% accurate? We need to get a 99%. Well, how hard can that be? It turns out quite hard. And getting to 99.9% is way harder than that. This is where I think the overhype comes from. It's not that it's not useful. For a long time, you're going to need people to carefully decide when it's appropriate to use it, to verify the results. And that's going to be years and years of work.
For the audience that's not in a Waymo or autonomous territory or city, can you just kind of recap that these cars are safer based on your data? They're better for people on the road, those who are on a bike or motorbike or pedestrian. This is very good technology, right?
So Waymo has put out data on their crashes. Experts I've talked to have said it's pretty credible. It seems to be about 80% less likely to get into crashes. And that's remarkable because naively, you might expect like in any given crash, like, any given vehicle is going to be at fault about half the time. So that suggests that not only is Waymo not directly causing basically no crashes, but they're also driving defensively enough that they're anticipating and like avoiding. Imagine a future 10 or 15 years from now where most vehicles have this technology or similar technology from another company. It's easily going to save thousands, probably tens of thousands of lives.
They're driving better now. The Waymos I've been in the last few months in San Francisco, they're more human.
This reminds me of two other parallels. A lot of my newsletters like drawing parallels between Waymo and LLM. One is that the actual underlying technology is becoming more like LLMs. Just as an LLM is trying to predict the next word, part of what they've done is train a model to kind of behave like a typical human. And so that I think has allowed Waymo's technology to be kind of smoother, more natural. People, I think, have this intuition that automation is like binary. Is like either the human's doing it or we've automated it. It's almost always you figure out a piece of the job that the robot can do. And you have some kind of protocol where there's a person around to help if it gets stuck. For most things we do with AI, that's how it works. That's another reason I think you're not going to see rapid job losses because it's going to be very gradual.
Silicon Valley storytellers call this human in the loop, which is a fancy way of saying there's some sort of partnership to get an acceptable or good outcome. And by the way, LLM companies are hiring doctors and lawyers and MBAs to check results and make sure that the AI is good enough.
Right. So the training also, like a lot of what they're doing is, you just hire an expert to create demonstration data. And they're doing this at a just absolutely mind-boggling scale. Because I think a lot of people have this intuition that's like cheating. Like if you claim your car is autonomous, but there's really a guy behind the curtain doing things, quote unquote, really autonomous. But if one person can be supervising 10 cars at once, that's a big productivity gain.
I found myself initially turning back to say thank you to the driver, right? Like you would obviously with an Uber or a taxi. And then, of course, a few more rides, you just forget to do that. What's going on, do you think, with Waymo that we can apply to other AIs in terms of our behavior?
I mean, I think people definitely do the same thing with chatbots. They'll like feel they have to say please and thank you, and they don't want to be rude to the chatbot. One of the other things I'll be interested to see is like, as this technology matures, right now they're taking kind of stock cars with steering wheels and gas pedals and just not letting anybody go in the driver's seat. Amazon has a company called Zoox that's trying to build a custom vehicle where there's no driver's seat. It's kind of a cool vehicle because it's reversible. So people in the front sit backwards. And one of the fun things about that is that you never have to turn around because the vehicle can go equally well in either direction. And so if the vehicle wants to go the other direction, it just starts driving that direction.
Is that actually how it works?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know. I mean, I've seen them around San Francisco. I haven't been in one yet. Drives in both directions.
It can drive in both directions. In 5 or 10 years, when this technology is ubiquitous, I think you're going to see kind of a Cambrian explosion of like vehicle types. Because right now, when you buy a vehicle, you got to have enough space. Sometimes you want to go out to the countryside and so you need a long range. And so all the vehicles kind of look the same because they have to be kind of good for everything. But I think you'll see more variety where some vehicles will be like a one-passenger vehicle that just could go around the city is very cheap. And on the flip side, maybe you'll have like a sleeper car where you get in and you go to sleep and 8 hours later you wake up at the cabin or whatever. You also see like people are building zero-occupant vehicles for like delivering pizzas and stuff.
That makes total sense. That's likely what's going to happen. That is happening, is kind of what you're saying with Zoox, right?
One of the issues is there's like all these safety regulations saying what characteristics a vehicle has to have. And they just assume that like there's a steering wheel. So there's rules about what the steering wheel can do. And so it took a while for Zoox to get approval to even sell this vehicle because they're like, we don't have a steering wheel because we don't need it. And the regulators were like, you're supposed to have a steering wheel. So I think there's going to have to be some policy work done. And it might happen in China or something before we get around to allowing it here. But yeah, in the long run, in the next 10 or 20 years, I expect a lot of that to happen.
Okay, my last Waymo question, because I have this theory that we're entering the era of super companies. And I think that the primary difference between old super companies and new ones will be the ability to leverage inference AI to the maximum business value. Do you think Waymo will be one of those companies when we look back in 10 years in terms of growth, profitability, and customer love?
I think they have a good shot at it. The thing I worry about with Waymo is they're a Google company, and Google does not have a good track record with like physical stuff. Like a decade ago, they tried to go into like the delivery business to compete with Amazon, and it just did not work at all. And so I think they have very good technology, they have very good engineers, but they need to scale up. They've got about 2,000 or 3,000 vehicles now, and they need to get up to tens and hundreds of thousands of vehicles. And I hope they have the culture to do that. They've been very cautious. They haven't had any major mistakes, which would be very bad for the company. But yeah, they need to be in a growth mode. I think they're trying, but I think it'll be challenging. What needs to happen is Waymo needs to have taxi services in enough cities that they then can offer like a nationwide service. Once they reach the scale where they can offer service in most markets, then they can go to auto companies and say, we'll license you the Waymo technology and you'll get the Waymo upgrade and then you'll be able to have a driverless car. That market's going to be huge. It's like a few $1,000s right now for one of those sensors. So I think if they can kind of scale up quickly and not like make any mistakes, they're in a very good position to be the leading company. I've been really struck. I had a competitor called Cruise that was a GM company that that basically went out of business a couple of years ago after a bad accident. I mean, Zoox is pretty far behind. Tesla's the one people talk most about.
Tesla's the bogeyman in the story, right?
I've traditionally been skeptical of their timelines. Like every year, Elon says like this is going to be the year, and it never is. But they're getting pretty close. Elon always has two optimistic timelines. People write him off, and eventually he figures it out. And I think once he does figure the technology out, he will scale up very quickly. And so that's the main thing I would worry about with Waymo. The other competition they have globally is China. A bunch of strong companies. And so from a global market, there's a question of can Waymo dominate in Europe and Latin America and places like that. I think they have quite a strong chance because being able to navigate vehicles in the physical world is going to be a huge market. And I think they're going to have the pole position in every part of it.
Let's circle back to LLMs now. It seems like at home, everybody loves it. We probably have 2 billion AI users around the world, US, China, India, biggest markets for everyday general purpose use. But when we get in the office, it's a different story, basically, right? The data that we have at Section AI confirms basically that AI is stalling out in the enterprise at this moment. I assume that's because of anxiety, employee anxiety and resistance. The challenge of getting people to use a tool that they've been told by the media is going to take their job for the past 3 years. What's your sense of what's going on?
So I think there's a couple of things going on. There was a widely cited study, I think maybe 6 to 9 months ago from MIT that was cited as saying that 95% of ad projects fail.
Total bullshit study, by the way, but I think it was directionally correct.
The way it's cited, I think, was misleading because what they said was when you have kind of formal enterprise projects to automate a specific thing, those projects tend to fail. And that's probably, I think, just because they're pilot projects. You know, enterprise software takes a long time to develop. The first version of any enterprise software, there's a pretty good chance it'll fail. So two things. One is like, that'll improve over time as they do the V2 and V3 and like work the kinks out. But also the other thing that study said was lots of employees were informally using ChatGPT or Claude to do whatever, maybe without the permission or approval of management. But that's very widely used in the industry. An analogy I've made before in the newsletter that I think is good is comparing it to the early years of electrification. So when electric motors were invented, at the time, most factories were driven by water power or steam power. You'd have one big shaft in the middle and everything would run off of that. It really limited the way you could design factories. It was dangerous because every machine had to work at the same kind of pace and it was hard to stop, et cetera. Initially, what they would do is they would just take an electric motor and stick it where the steam engine used to be. The real productivity game was they realized you could have a lot of small motors, have each workstation have its own little motor. You could run them separately. You could be much more efficient, et cetera. But that took 20 or 30 years because they had to like totally redesign factories or build new factories. But then you had a big productivity gain. And I see a similar thing where I think a lot of the early things are you just take your existing structure and saying which of these steps can we like replace with an AI or add an AI to? And that doesn't work that well because the process was not designed for that. But there's going to be a second generation of innovation where either new companies or companies with like innovative leaders totally rethink the process and say, now that we're like familiar with AI, we know like what the best practices are. How can we do this in a totally different way that's like AI native? And that'll take 5 or 10 or 15 years. But I think in the long run, that's where you get the really big.
Back to the individual worker. From my perspective, they seem either on the sideline or, resistant. I mean, not in startups, so not in Silicon Valley, but if you get outside of Silicon Valley into corporate America, I think you have a lot of employees just worried about their jobs.
The way diffusion works is kind of company by company. So as you were saying earlier, you've got the AI companies, they're like AI native. They're already like doing their programming in an AI native way, and I'm sure other processes like that. But I think with any new technology, there's some companies that are kind of more tech forward and usually smaller companies and newer companies, and then other ones that are more resistant. And what happens is that the more experimental companies fail a few times, find something that works, and then word spreads either through employees moving or, industry press or whatever, and that you gradually expand in kind of concentric circles out to the less innovative companies. And so from the perspective of an individual employee, it'll feel like nothing's happening for a long time. Suddenly, now everybody in the industry is doing it, and then it becomes kind of the standard way of doing it. But that'll happen in different industries and companies at different times.
More broadly, though, Tim, that diffusion has to happen before all the money runs out. If you're the AI companies, meaning consumers aren't paying for this. You've given them great AI for free, pretty much. That was smart for the AI companies, right? Get us all addicted or hooked. Bottom line is enterprise has to pay the bills here for AI. So it kind of feels like to me, at some point, we have to turn enterprise revenue on for AI companies before they run out of capital. Otherwise, I think the bubble does burst. Because the 20 billion from OpenAI is their revenue forecast this year. That's impressive, but it's not nearly enough.
Absolutely. It needs to keep growing. You think about the internet, there was a quote unquote internet bubble in 2000. There definitely were companies that failed and there was a downturn. But the people who said like the internet's the future of the economy, we're correct. Is there going to be a similar pattern where, there's a downturn and a bunch of AI companies go out of business, but then AI turns out to be valuable, or is it just going to be straight up to the right? I think that's almost impossible to predict.
And as you know, when that internet bubble burst, Wall Street Journal ridiculed Jeff Bezos and everybody called it Amazon.bomb. And and they had a rough couple of years for sure. The stock dropped 95% in value. And then they spent the next 10 years building warehouses and distribution centers while everybody else basically got distracted and said, we don't have to worry about the internet anymore or e-commerce anymore. I guess it's the same thing will happen here. Let's switch to 2026, some of your predictions, one of which was you thought OpenAI and Anthropic would hit their revenue targets. In your mind, what are the top 2 or 3 predictions you want this audience, who are mostly AI leaders and startup founders and so on, what should we be paying attention to in terms of what's going to happen in 2026?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, the self-driving, we're going to see a lot of expansion. I think Waymo's talking about being in about 15 cities by the end of 2026. That's going to be a big deal. There's some people who think we're going to have really rapid economic growth. I do not think that's going to be the case. I mean, the U.S. economy is really huge. So, these AI companies can grow into trillion-dollar companies in terms of market cap, but still in terms of their revenue and their kind of impact on the economy.
Not move the needle much.
Yeah. And so over the next 5 to 10 years, I'm pretty bullish that it'll bump economic growth. I think it'll not move the needle that much in terms of 2026.
Not these dramatic job losses that Dario's been warning of for the last 5 years.
I don't agree with Dario that we're going to have a ton of white-collar workers laid off.
Why does he keep doing it? Kind of covering his ass?
No, the opposite. No, I think the opposite. I think, like I said before, I think he's a true believer. I think he sincerely believes. I think a weird thing about the way the AI industry has evolved is that 10 to 15 years ago, there was these people who had these very dramatic predictions about what would happen with AI. And I think maybe somewhat by luck, they just happen to be correct. But when you have that kind of lucky success, you become very confident.
So you keep predicting.
Keep predicting this is going to keep happening. And on some level, I think it will. I think it will continue scaling. But it's very easy, I think, to become over optimistic and be we're going to get to AI scientists and everybody's going to be obsolete in 3 years. And so, yeah, I think that's not going to happen. You think about the way that the discourse happened in 2023. People thought if you just keep scaling up the kind of classic pre-reasoning models, you're going to get to AGI, but GPT-5. Everybody talking about GPT-5 is going to be so amazing. And in some ways, GPT-5 is amazing, but it's not AGI. It's kind of more limited. And I think people just underestimate how many steps of improvement it's going to take to get to human level. People think we're maybe 2 or 3 steps away. And I think we're maybe 10 or 15 steps away. I don't even know. But it's just hard to see where the top of the mountain is. And so you'll see we're moving up the mountain pretty quickly. But the top is in clouds and we don't know how high it is. We can just see that we're making progress.
So, Tim, I think the bubble would burst sooner if OpenAI is unable to raise their $100 billion round, which apparently they need to do maybe by spring, summer timeframe at the latest. Do you think they're going to be able to close that round? It looks like NVIDIA might lead or be the anchor, which kind of makes sense for them, right? They don't want the bubble to burst anytime soon, obviously. What's your take on that round?
I do think that OpenAI is struggling a little bit relative to Anthropic and Google. I don't think they're in any danger of going bankrupt or anything like that. But I think Anthropic has a very strategy focused on business users. It's working very well for them. Google just has the advantage that they already have all the users, and so they can just add AI to all their existing products. OpenAI has focused on consumers, which has some advantages, but it means there's a lot of headaches. They have to deal with teenagers.
And a lot of inference you don't get reimbursed for, right?
I wouldn't say I'm pessimistic about them, but of the 3 kind of leading companies, I think they're having the most trouble. And so it would not surprise me if they have a little trouble raising money. People, I think, get the impression that because they're losing money, the kind of core business is unsustainable. If the fundraising environment becomes a little more difficult, they'll just stop cutting prices so quickly at a cost of maybe losing market share or not growing as quickly. I think they have room to do that. So I'm not that pessimistic about OpenAI.
Kids, parents and kids, what's going on at schools? And as a parent, what should I do?
So my oldest is 10. And so I don't have any insight really for teenagers. Younger kids, I think I mostly just kept my kids away from it. Also keep them away from social media and limit screens. So I'm one of these tech people that don't really think kids should be doing a lot of tech. But I think that's going to continue to be my stance.
When though? How long can you enforce that?
I'm not sure because I haven't had teenagers yet. My guess is I'll be pretty conservative about it. I'm definitely one of these parents that it's going to be a long time before my daughter gets a smartphone. So
you think AI is in that same bucket? We should be constraining access just for mental health, emotional health, develop the human.
People have cravings for social interaction. And if you create an artificial substitute for it in the form of chatbots that can be your best friend and maybe you're a romantic partner, I think that's really unhealthy. Teenagers need to learn to interact with other people first, really get solid on that before we give them these kind of artificial people that in some ways are optimized to be more engaging and less kind of difficult in real life friendships.
Yeah, my point of view on this, Tim, is as parents, we can't outsource this to schools or someone else, right? You should not outsource the conversation about drugs, sex, alcohol, or social media to someone else. As a parent, you own it. And I think you own the conversation about AI, and expecting your school and the teachers and the administrations to sort it out, I think is just naive and abdicating responsibility. Sadly, I think the place where AI is causing the most chaos right now is schools. It's crazy, right? Just in terms of high school and college. I mean,
kids cheating.
Yeah, it's out of control. And again, why are we surprised? And the teachers and administration are just like, what do we do? And I think about sort of real chaos. I think it's schools, frankly, right now. That's where it's happening. Companies next maybe, but certainly schools, unfortunately, All right, let's end on a high note. Best thing you've seen from AI the last few months. I already said my thing. My favorite thing is Waymo.
So personally, I use it a lot for research. Like a lot of what I'll do is I'll want to write a sentence making some claim about the world. And I'll be like, am I sure that's true? And a year ago, I would have had to go on Google and myself read a bunch of documents, but now I can have the AI go out and find the best documents. Like I still check the source, but also I'm more rigorous. I'll see more things I should check out than I would otherwise. So I would say that's the biggest thing. I'm very impressed by the coding models. I'm not a programmer, so I'm not personally using them heavily, but I really do think the discipline of programming is changing radically right now. And I think that's going to be a big deal for programmers. And I think a similar thing is going to happen for a lot of other professions like lawyers and accountants and so forth in the next 2 or 3 years. So everybody should be paying some attention to what's happening in programming because that's coming for everybody else.
I think they are the canaries in the coal mine. You're right. And I think this is coming fast to everywhere else in knowledge work I do. Things have changed in my mind the last few months in terms of the pace of this and the impact. So let's all get ready. Tim, thanks for joining us. Yeah, we'll talk again later this year. Tim and I covered a lot of ground. Here's some of my takeaways. One is we're likely in a bubble or bubbles, and some of which will burst and some of which will not. Tim's perspective is OpenAI's bubble's not bursting yet, and that he has high confidence in their forecast of $20 billion of revenue. By any measure, is incredible growth from just 2 or 3 years ago. Having said that, it's been a tough year for OpenAI, and clearly Anthropic and Google have made real gains in terms of the AI race. I loved his insights around Waymo. These technologies are always harder, it always takes longer, and there's always humans involved, both in building the product and delivering the product. And I think we see this with LLMs as well. There's humans involved in training the product, and there's probably more humans than we realize making these AIs great, and that's certainly the case with Waymo. And that when AIs reach the real world, it's unpredictable and hard. I loved his prediction around new form factors for cars. I'd never thought about that. I absolutely can see autonomous driving all over the place in terms of every city eventually. But this idea that because that will be an accepted way to move people around, we'll have cars without any humans in them in terms of making deliveries, all running on these autonomous systems. So we're going to see this explosion of form factors, designs, and styles. That to me is just exciting. I can't wait to see that. Next episode, we'll be talking with Wade Foster, CEO of Zapier, and how he wants to turn Zapier into a super company. In the meantime, you can find me online at gregshove.com, where you can sign up for my newsletter. And if you got a second right now, leave us a rating or review. It helps others find this show and makes me feel good.